Well, then we will get this party started with a special Planning Commission meeting. The City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission on April 7th, 2021. I'll call it to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chair Milliken.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Voss.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Patelko.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Chambers.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Phelps.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Burgess.
Present here in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Swann.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. We've received a formal agenda for today, and just, well, first of all, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
And for the benefit of those that did not hear before, earlier as we were getting on, we've got a number of training items that we have hopes of covering today. We've got sort of a hard out at 6 o'clock, and we need to get an opportunity for citizen comment. So we're going to try to cover as much of this as we can by 5:45-ish. But we want to make sure that we all, as planning commissioners, have an opportunity to ask questions and get the information that we need. So ask those questions, have that discussion, etc. If there's anything we don't get to by 5:45-ish, then we will just carry over those training items to our next meeting later on this month. So our regularly scheduled April meeting, our regularly rescheduled April meeting. So, but they're on our agenda today, and we'll see how much we get through. So with that, can I get a motion to accept our agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Many.
Motion by Burgess, second by Chambers. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed, same? Great, thank you. Any communications or announcements?
No communications or announcements. I do want to acknowledge Mr. Harrison is with us. Thank you for joining us. But yeah, that's the only announcement I've got.
Great, thank you. Any new business? Nope.
No new business.
There's no public hearings on the agenda, but I will note for the record and for those potentially listening online, we will have a place for citizen comments on non-agenda items later in the meeting. And so as we've been doing throughout this pandemic, you're welcome to call at 269-226-6573 and leave a message for us. And any messages that are left, we will play them during that citizen comments time and hear them then. So, and that will be held certainly before 6, if not earlier, depending on how we do with the training. So seeing no public hearings on the agenda, we'll move right into our training. So Pete, take us away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. And I see that City Commissioner Jack Urban has also joined us. So you've noticed him on the bottom of your screen. That's our other recent bouncing in, but it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us, Commissioner Urban. We're going to start off with introductions, and we're going to keep this really, really simple, but at least will help you familiarize yourself with one another and, you know, learn a little bit about, you know, those that have been on the board for a while. So I'm going to call on names, and then you just go through and give your name, your neighborhood you live in. If you are a new member, then tell us why you want to serve on the Planning Commission. If you're an existing member, let us know, let the group know how long you've been serving on the Planning Commission. So name, neighborhood, why you want to be on the Planning Commission, or how long you've been serving on the Planning Commission, if you're existing. So let's start off, we'll start with Chair Milliken, because he's always such a great example.
Greg Milliken. I'm from the Winchell neighborhood. I've been on the Planning Commission for 5 years, and I forget already what else you said, but I work at Bronson Healthcare Group. So,
how long you've been on the Planning Commission?
I've been on the commission for 5 years.
That was it. All right. How about Commissioner Voss?
Yes, my name is Saki. I was just checking. I've been on the Planning Commission since 2017. had to go back and check that. I live in the West Douglas neighborhood, and day to day I work at WMUK.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Patelko.
Hi, I'm Brian Patelko. I live in the Winchell neighborhood. I have been on the Planning Commission for just a little over a year, and I work at the Upjohn Institute.
And Mr. Pitts is not with us tonight. Commissioner Chambers.
Oh, I remember to take the mute off. Hi, I'm Sade Chambers. I have been with the Planning Commission now for over a year, and I just recently moved, and I'm on the east side of town, I guess Eastwood.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Harrison.
Yes, so I am Michael Harrison. I live in the Westnich Hills community. I'm a part of, I serve for the Kalamazoo Black Male Alliance, and I am excited to join tonight's conversation and just the work that we do together today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Commissioner Phelps.
Hi, I'm Ariah. I'm a new commissioner, and I live in the Central Business District. And I wanted to join the commission because I help get politicians elected for a living, and none of them ever wanted to run for planning commission. So I thought I better do it myself.
Thank you. Commissioner Burgess.
Hi, I'm David Burgess. I am new to the Planning Commission. I'm also fairly new to the city of Kalamazoo. I've only lived here for 2 years. I'm in what I think of as the Hillcrest neighborhood, but that's not really recognized. I'm on the edge of West Main Hill, near the Y. And the Planning Commission for me is not just a great way to be plugged into the community, but to be actually involved in molding the future of the community. So I'm pretty excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Swann.
You guys are hitting me just as the train's going by. I'm Jennifer Swann. I live in the Millwood neighborhood, brand new to the commission. I work at Tower Pinkster, so I deal with planning commission and zoning and all that stuff on a day-to-day basis. So it interests me in what's going on in the city of Kalamazoo.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to a overview of Robert's rules. And we've got City Attorney Clyde Robinson that's going to go through this with us.
Are you ready for me to take over?
We are ready. Yeah, if you have any difficulty, just signal and let me know.
All right. Well, I'm computer illiterate, but I'm going to try to share my screen. So, but it says the host is disabled, so I can't share the screen. I will let you pop up the PowerPoint, Pete, if you've got it then.
Amanda, while Pete is bringing up the PowerPoint, can you make sure that Clyde, Pete, and I can all share our screens?
While they're getting the PowerPoint, I assume all of you got the packet that was sent out by Amanda yesterday. That is something that you can keep and refer to. It is intended not to be an in-depth review of Robert's Rules of Order. If you are so interested, there is such a book. I have a copy, and it's kind of thick, small print, and I refer to it when I need to. But despite the thickness of that volume, Robert's Rules is not that hard. As I said in the cover piece, it's not a rabbit hole of rules that you have to worry about going down the rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland. So with that, I'm going to go through this PowerPoint, and I'm going to cover some of the basic issues that come up in going through a meeting. So I'm going to have some examples of some of the common issues that you will encounter. And hopefully when you see these things, you'll feel a little more comfortable in going through a meeting, because it's not difficult, but sometimes you get lost in the weeds because of parliamentary procedure. I'll give you a little bit of overview about Roberts. It's in the material. He was a brigadier general when he retired. He was served in the Great Lakes area for a while as an engineer, worked in Michigan and in Wisconsin on lighthouses and other type of navigational engineering in the Great Lakes. And he was in the, before he came to Michigan and worked here, he was in New England, and he was asked to chair a church meeting. And there was no rules to really go by, and it became a bit of a difficult situation for him. And he said, I'm resolved to do something about this if I'm ever asked to chair another meeting. And so while there were rules of parliamentary procedure that had existed, primarily Thomas Jefferson put together the rules that's still used by the U.S. House of Representatives. And there were some other examples from England. Oftentimes there was conflict in the rules as to what is a ranking motion and what do you do when you encounter a certain situation. So there was no universality to these rules. So he took it upon himself to put together what became about a roughly 175-page booklet of rules. And it eventually was developed and rewritten and revised. And we're now on the 11th edition. And it's still within his family. He still has probably a great or great grandson that is continuing to be part of the editorial board that reviews the rules periodically. And of course, if you're really interested, you can become a parliamentarian. You can take a course. While I've not got that certification, I've made a study of parliamentary rules for even before I guess I started back in 6th grade. Being interested in the law of how a meeting should proceed. And so while I'm not a certified parliamentarian, I'm very familiar with Robert's Rules. If you go to the next slide, please. This is kind of something that this was Henry Robert, who, like I said, he put these rules together. And this is kind of his guiding philosophy, that he felt it was necessary for everybody to have some grasp of how to run a meeting so as to have an organized approach to solving problems and in a small group or even a large group. And to that end, there are some things that the rules attempt to do. They attempt to guard the rights of the minority. They attempt to make sure that the majority has the will to do things. And if you're on the losing side, that you've had an opportunity to participate, and that once the decision is made, even though you may be on the losing side of it, you will go along with and carry out the will of the board as dictated by the majority. So next slide. So I'm going to go through 7 basics as I call them out. And again, they're also in the last page or two of the outline that I provided you, kind of the 10 commandments. So I'm going to kind of go through what a motion looks like, what you have to worry about in terms of debate, and some of the things that may come up, particularly for this board, as you work through Robert's rules. Next slide. So the chair does not make motions, but the chair can request or suggest a motion, usually by the chair will entertain a motion too, and then you have somebody make the motion. Once you recognize, there is a format. I've heard, and I don't know if anybody on this board, but sometimes the person will say, I motion that. Well, that's okay, but the proper was I move that. And here's an example that we're going to carry through this example through the rest of the slides. I move, go back to the other slide. I move that a special use permit as requested by the Smith brothers to operate a kennel for ferrets at 827 West Cedar be approved. So they've come to the planning board. They're asking for a special use permit, and so they want to operate a kennel ferret kennel at 829 West Cedar. So once that motion is made, it needs a second in order to be acted upon. So another member, without the need to be recognized, should say, I second the motion, or just second. Again, the language that Roberts uses, you shouldn't use support, since that indicates an agreement with the motion. All you're doing is you're seconding the motion so as to bring that action or that proposal before the body for action. So next slide, please. So now you've got the motion. Now there's some discussion on the merits of the motion. So the chair should, at the beginning, should restate the motion. The motion is to grant a special use permit to the Smith brothers to operate a kennel on West Cedar Street. So the maker of the motion has the first opportunity to speak, but need not do so. And according to Roberts, even though the maker of the motion may ultimately vote against it, they should not speak against the motion. That's a little quirk that, again, is not always observed, but generally the maker of the motion has the first opportunity to speak, but need not do so. And everybody has an opportunity to speak on a matter once, and before anybody else can speak a second time, everybody has to have that opportunity to speak on it for the first time. If the chair says there's 9 members of the planning commission and 6 members have talked on the motion, and now one of the first 6 wants to speak again, before that individual can speak, the chair should inquire of those members who haven't spoke if they have any desire to do so. If not, then a person who's spoken on the matter before can speak again. And it's on the main motion at this point. And in this case, because you are a public body and you usually have to make findings in order to support the decision, because there may be people who have appeared before the board and said, I'm not in favor of the ferret kennel on Cedar Street because I live across the street, or I know that ferrets they're a wily little animal and they escape, and we're going to have ferrets running all over the neighborhood. So you need to make those findings in your discussion. It's not saying, oh, the Smith brothers are really good people. They have a veterinary degree and they're solid members of the community. That has nothing to do with whether or not you should give the special use permit, because there are criteria that have to be met in order to grant the special use permit. And so you want to say, oh, the facts are the Smith brothers have said they're going to make sure there's adequate cages. There's going to be, the ferrets are going to be put on a leash, or they're going to have some type of collar and the like. So you need to refer to the facts in the record when you're making your points in order to either in favor of or against the motion. Now, sometimes debate can go on for a long time, and there is a motion to end debate or to call the previous question. This requires another second motion and a second and a 2/3 vote. If approved, then the debate ends, and the next thing to do is to ask for the vote. Next slide, please. Sometimes, however, in the course of the discussion, there may be a desire to amend. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. And so to amend the motion, a member would be recognized by the chair and say that I move to amend the motion, and I move to add the words "and mink" after the word ferrets. So the motion would receive a second, and the chair should restate the motion. In this case, the motion is to add the words "and mink" after the word ferret. Therefore, if approved, the approval would be to operate both a ferret and mink operation as a special use permit. Now, that is the matter under discussion, whether to add mink to the proposal. So you're no longer discussing the main motion. This is a secondary question. And so now the discussion is focused on this motion. That is whether to add the word mink to the request. So next slide, please. Now, there is, now you would, once there is no further discussion or there's been a motion to end discussion, now the chair should repeat the question being voted upon. And so at this, in the example, that is, that the matter that before the board is all in favor of replacing the word mink with the phrase other. Well, I think I missed one. There's, let me go back to the other previous slide, would you? Okay. Sometimes, and I paragraph D, I meant to mention this. So you have the main motion, you can amend the main motion, and you can do one more amendment. The Roberts Rules doesn't allow a fourth action, but you can amend the amendment. Sometimes that's you really start going down the lane here, and the path gets rather hard to make out. But at this point, yes, you can. Now, another way to approach this is to, if you want an amendment to an amendment, sometimes it's better just to act on the original amendment and then propose a second one. But you can amend an amendment. And so in the example I provided is that another member would like to amend the proposed amendment. So I move that the word mink be replaced by the phrase other members of the weasel family. So now the motion would be, if approved, for ferrets and other members of the weasel family to as a kennel on Cedar Street. So now, if that is seconded, that is the matter under discussion, whether the language other members of the weasel family should be added in lieu of mink. So you see where we're going with this. You can get kind of confusing, but as I said, that's my job as the kind of the unofficial parliamentarian to keep the board and particularly the chair on consistent acting through the Roberts Rules. So it can be confusing at times, but you may amend an amendment, but go no further. So next slide. So now the question before the body is whether you should replace mink with other members of the weasel family. And so the chair would say, all say yes, all opposed say no. Then the chair would announce the results. Now, I know there is language that sometimes you say all in favor say aye, all opposed say no. Aye is kind of a colloquial old time term. There is a column that appears just about almost monthly in the Michigan Bar Journal for lawyers, and they're always urging plain English to lawyers when they're communicating. And one of the articles a few years ago suggested getting rid of the word I and say yes, as opposed to I. The other, so there's no confusion, if you will. So that's my suggestion. The other thing that oftentimes, and again, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but a chair might say, all opposed, same sign. Well, what does that mean? Do you say yes if you're voting no? And so it should say, if you are in favor, please say yes. All opposed, please say no. So in this case, the board voted and they chose not to replace the word mink with other members of the weasel family. And so the chair announces the result. The motion is defeated. Now the question before the board, remember we amended an amendment, is whether to insert the word mink after ferret to permit the kenneling of both types of animals at 829 West Cedar. Is there any further discussion? Because this is now the proposition under discussion. If there's no further debate or discussion, the chair should call for the vote. And then, again, this was an amendment, so it's all in favor of inserting the word mink after the word ferrets. Please say yes. Any opposed, say no. Then the chair announces the results. He said, in this case, the motion's approved. The question before the board now is you're going to the original motion. The question is whether a special use permit is requested by the Smith brothers to operate a kennel for ferrets and mink at 829 should be approved. Next slide. Sometimes, and this is kind of 4A.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
When we're talking about voting on amendments and the voice vote, so that is, we're looking for a majority there, right?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And unless I say requires a 2/3 vote, it's always a majority.
Okay, thanks.
And because you're a public body, the public's got to be able to see your vote so they can, if you will, know and hold you accountable for that. So you can do that in a variety of ways. Oftentimes there'll be a roll call vote, and so you're on record. Sometimes if it's just a matter of a procedural vote, as we did with the approval of the minutes earlier, you can show your hand as long as, again, the public can see that you are affirmatively showing your hand and voting. That's okay. But the problem is if there's no such thing as a secret ballot by public bodies, so that the public has every right to know how you as an official or as a member of a board is voting. And so there's no such thing as a secret vote on a public body under the Open Meetings Act. Now, there are ways in which you can vote without everybody knowing what your vote is if you're all voting at the same time. That has happened with the City Commission, in that we will use a paper ballot that has a particular commissioner's name on it, and they vote. Usually they're voting for somebody maybe to fill a vacancy or something. And so you don't want to necessarily have, let's say there's two people who are wanting the position, and you've got a 3-3 split. So you know that last person who votes gets to cast the deciding vote. And so in order to avoid that kind of situation, everybody votes on a piece of paper, but the commissioner's identified. So then the clerk gets all the papers back and said, oh, Commissioner Jones says this, Commissioner Smith says this, Commissioner Johnson said this. So that the public is informed how each commissioner vote, but at the time the vote was taken, nobody else knew what the other members of the board were voting. So that's a way you can still comply with the Open Meetings Act, but still have somewhat of a secret ballot, if you will. I wanted to set out when should you not vote. As I point out, as a member of a public body, you've got a duty under Michigan law to vote unless you are otherwise conflicted or precluded from doing so due to a personal, financial, or fiduciary interest in the matter. So, for instance, if you were a member and you worked for the Smith brothers, you shouldn't vote because you have some type of interest, even though you may not own the business, you're just an employee. You're in a difficult situation. Of course, you're going to vote for what your bosses particularly want, and that's not necessarily representing the community as a whole. Or if you have maybe you have a stake in the Smith brothers business, you are a silent partner. You've given them some money to get started. Again, you shouldn't vote in that situation. Further, if generally there is the Michigan laws in regard to notice, usually have a 300-foot area from the area. So if you live on Walnut Street, you are probably within 300-foot curve, particularly it's the 800 block of Walnut, and you shouldn't vote on it because, again, you are in that area of individuals who, it's a matter of state public policy, are deemed to get special notice of this matter. And so therefore, because your property may be impacted, you again should not engage in that discussion or voting on the matter. As I've indicated, when you are precluded from voting, you should state the reason why on the record so that can be reflected. Again, the public has a right to know what the nature of the conflict is and why you aren't voting. Some attorneys, municipal attorneys, advise the individual who's conflicted leave the room or step off the dais. There's no legal authority that requires that. I don't know. I've never said that you should leave the dais. I think some people, your mere presence creates a problem. I don't quite see it that way. On the other hand, if an individual feels strongly enough and they want to leave the room or step off the dais, you're free to do so, but I don't think it's legally required. But you may not participate in any of the discussion or any of the debate or vote on the matter. Next slide. So what about if you don't have enough information? And so the question is, again, should we permit ferrets and mink kennel at 829 Cedar? Well, and you may want to get more information. So you may postpone. Now, and where this is oftentimes confused is a person that makes a motion to table. Under Robert's rules, a motion to table is a separate type of motion. It is something that when you're considering something and a matter comes in of such urgency that you have to take up that matter right away. And so you take the business that you're addressing and you table it in order to address the issue that's of emergency matter. Then you have to then take a step to remove the matter you put on the table. You have to remove it off the table later in the meeting. The motion to postpone is really what you're looking for. And you say, I'm not prepared to act on it at this meeting. I need some more information. So I move to postpone action on this matter until. And there's basically two major ways to do that. The next meeting. So you know that in a month's time, it'll be on the agenda for action, or after a certain described event. For instance, I don't want to act on this until we receive a report from the local Humane Society and the fire marshal as to whether or not the building is sprinkled, because I'd hate to see all these animals destroyed in a fire, and it's kind of a quasi. It's not really a residential use, and so until we get that report, I'm uncomfortable in acting on this. So you can make that motion. And then once either the next meeting occurs or the described event takes place, then it comes back on the agenda. Again, that's a motion that requires a second and requires a majority vote. The other type of postponement is to postpone indefinitely. Now, this is, again, one of those parliamentary tricks, if you will, that is used by a body that really doesn't want to say no to something, but doesn't want to enact it either. So they move to postpone indefinitely. That basically kills it. This is not an appropriate motion for the most part for a deliberative public body, as you have a public duty to act on matters coming before the board. It's more of a legislative matter that you can use. The other thing I would also point out, and I should have pointed out in one of the earlier slides, is when I say you need a second, if a motion doesn't receive a second, it just dies. And you don't even have to record it in the minutes because it's like it never happened. But once it gets that second, then the matter is now properly before the body. Next slide. Sometimes you may want to reconsider because you misunderstood, or you've been confused, or you just have a desire to change your vote. And this motion should be made as soon as possible when there's no other matter pending at the same meeting. Now, sometimes under bylaws, that motion is available at the second meeting, and under Roberts, you can also bring it when the minutes for the meeting at which the decision was made is coming up for approval. The problem with this, however, is it does raise a question of openness and transparency. The Smith brothers and the neighbors were all there to make their case as to whether or not the ferret kennel should be approved. And then if you wait till a later meeting to say, oh, I'd like to reconsider this, they're not going to get any prior notice generally that you're reconsidering it. And they might have a stake in it to see, and wonder why you're reconsidering it. All the materials then before you, is there something new that's changed? And they may want to speak to it. So it's probably not a good idea to reconsider at a later meeting. Now, certainly it's appropriate at the meeting in which you've made the decision. However, you should know that most times when their issue comes up, either for or against, and you've made the original decision, they're clearing out of the room because they want to get home to their families or whatever, and you're ready to take up the next matter that's before you. So even then you run the risk of not having anybody who might be there to hear that. But if you are confused and you may want to reconsider, the only people who can make that motion are people who voted on the prevailing side. So in this case, the example was that the motion was approved to grant the special use permit. It's only a member on the prevailing side that can bring a motion to reconsider. And again, that must be seconded, and then you vote on whether you should take it up again. So you don't automatically return to the original motion. You actually deliberate on whether you should consider it a second time to reconsider it. Then you vote to reconsider it or not. If the motion to reconsider is defeated, you don't take any further action. If the motion is approved, then you return to the original motion. That is, whether a ferret kennel should be permitted on Cedar Street. Next slide. Finally, recess and adjournment at the end of the evening, or even if it's a long evening, and you need to stretch your legs or use the restroom. Oftentimes, a member can request it of the chair. Again, Roberts does permit a formal motion, but it's not necessary. Usually, the chair, and there's again, in a small group, when you got a group of less than 15 people, the chair has a certain amount of prerogative. As I said, the chair can ask or request a motion. In this case, the chair can say, unless there's an objection, we've been here for 2 hours, let's take a 15-minute recess to stretch our legs, and we will reconvene at 9:50. Or at the end of the meeting, there being no further business before the board, I declare the meeting adjourned, unless there's an objection. And then in that case, you have to have a motion. Again, each board has its own personality. The chair or the board as a whole may prefer a motion to recess or adjourn. But in general cases, that's really not necessary because, again, the prerogative of the chair, you finished your business. There's no reason to continue the meeting and a motion to that end. You can just say the meeting's adjourned. The other thing you should know, and I haven't really talked about it because I'm really focused on Robert's rules, is you do operate under the Michigan Open Meetings Act. And that's an entirely different, and I could talk another half hour on that, but I know that we're at a crunch for time, so I'm not going to do that. But under the Open Meetings Act, if you do recess for more than 36 hours, the meeting must be renoticed. Next slide. There you go. I tried to get through that and kind of try to use a humorous example, and hopefully will stick with you a little bit in terms of how you work through a motion with a few different things that may occur in the course of considering this. I would say most of the time, 95% of the time, you're going to have one motion that you're going to be under consideration for. You're not going to ask for amendments and all of that. And while there's the other thing you need to also be cognizant of, particularly in the area of planning and zoning, while there may be a request for special use, and I didn't get into it in this example, you can put conditions on some uses. The issue is number one, the condition has to be relevant to a real planning and zoning concern. And the other issue is that those conditions generally run with the land. So even though the Smith brothers have been, in this example, been granted the kennel for ferrets, if they decide in a year's time that they want to get out of the business, they want to give it to Acme Weasel Company to run the ferret kennel, they can do that, and Acme Weasel Company would be able to operate the kennel because it is a special use permit, and that runs with that parcel of land until at some point there is a desire to abandon that use. generally there's an abandonment of use takes about a year. As again, it's a question of the course of this question of intent. And so if the building's been vacant or it's been even converted to a different use that is again lawful within our zoning code, you can say that the use to use that property for kenneling ferrets and mink has passed. It's no longer running with the land. Nobody has a right to do it anymore. But then again, it's a question of intent. Sometimes while we have that 1 year marker, that's not necessarily a tried and true definitive answer sometimes. So it's a question of intent and a question of law, but we do have that default in there, if you will. So I hope if there's any questions, I'm more than well happy to answer them. I think I've covered both parts 3 and 4 of the outline for the agenda.
I had a question if I could.
Go for it.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, can you clarify in regards to conflicts of interest, the timing at which somebody needs to declare a conflict if they have one? That would be before the discussion and not just before the vote, right?
Right. You should not even engage in the discussion if you're conflicted. You should, as soon as you're aware of it, you should make the rest of the body and the chair and the recording secretary aware of it.
Thank you. I've just been in situations where folks didn't realize that point. So thank you.
Yeah, engaging in the discussion and then say, oh, I'm conflicted, you've put a taint on the whole process and opened up whatever action is taken to attack by one side or the other, depending who lost.
What other questions do folks have? There's a lot of good information. Yeah, Brian.
One of the things that's come up in the last year that I've actually been curious about is along the lines of the amendments. Occasionally we have done a thing where the body has directed staff to make clarifications or tweaks or something before it went on to a vote of the city commission. I've actually never quite understood sort of how binding or suggestive that is, or sort of where that falls in the process of, if it's not necessarily a formal amendment, but that's something I've never been actually fully clear on.
Yeah, I cringe a little bit when that occurs as well. But oftentimes you've heard the term friendly amendments. It's not recognized by Robert's rules. And I'm willing to say if it's just a matter of clarification and not a substantive issue, then it's probably okay. Again, it's really the key is for the chair to announce what the issue is that you're voting on. And if there is any clarification. The other thing is, the maker of the motion, do you go along with that friendly amendment? And the maker says, then you go to the second agree. That really should be avoided. If there's need for clarification because maybe there's a word that you prefer over another, that can be handled as generally the maker of the motion has no objection. And that if the chair says, yeah, we'll substitute this word for that word, it really doesn't change anything, but maybe it helps clarify the intent, that's okay, as long as it's clearly understood by the rest of the body. That's what you're kind of, by consensus, you're agreeing that that's the question you're going to consider. So again, you don't have to necessarily jump through that amendment hoop every time, but it is the preferred way particularly if it's a substantive type of issue. And that's why I picked the example I did. The question is for ferrets. Well, okay, mink is a kind of in the same kind of thing. Are we going to permit that? And then I said, well, what if we go to weasels? And there's a whole bunch of a similar type of animals in the weasel family, which include skunks and otters and badgers. Those are usually not used as pets, but mink and ferrets can be. And so that was the reason for using that example. And those are substantive amendments. And so that's why I wanted to, I use that example as opposed to maybe a simple word here or there that helps clarify. Maybe that's a long-winded answer, but again, there's a reason that there's a parliamentary procedure, and it's better to follow it rather than to be informal. But there is, as I've indicated, the prerogative of the chair. And sometimes you can, again, in a small group, you don't want the rules to be a straitjacket and preclude you from taking a simple action and spending 5 minutes on a motion when you can do it in 30 seconds.
Anyone else? Any other questions right now?
I've got a question. Mr. Robinson,
Sure.
So I've watched a number of different boards and commissions, and when someone is making a motion, it tends to vary as to whether they come right out with the motion or if there's some sort of prelude or precursor they want to say, like, well, I saw this thing the other day and it really inspired me to do X, Y, or Z. And so just so I'm clear, when I go to make a motion, what is the preferred way in Robert's rules? Because I see any kind of comment prior to the motion made as discussion. Is that correct?
I would agree with you. The simplest thing to do is, because all you're trying to do is get the proposal or the proposition before the body for discussion. Those points that you want to raise in support or reason why you're making the motion, that is really discussion. And if you're the maker of the motion, you have the first opportunity to speak to it. So the example that I use both in terms of the PowerPoint and in the handout is that I move that, or I move for the approval of. The other thing is, and I didn't really focus on it, is it always should be stated in the affirmative so that a yes means you're going to grant something, as opposed to, I move we deny the special use permit. So I'm voting yes to say no. And that's illogical. And again, it clashes with the plain English kind of approach that the state bar has advocated. So you really always want to state it in the affirmative. And as a maker of the motion, while you can't speak against it, you can vote against it. So you may not favor the ferret kennel, but you can certainly make the motion to approve it, and then you can vote no.
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure there may be more questions, but in the interest of time, I think we'll move to our next topic, and we'll have an opportunity either today or at our next meeting to ask further questions. But Pete or Christina, what do we got? What do we got next?
It is the discussion about Imagine Kalamazoo and guiding documents. So let me get my screen up.
Awesome.
So first of all, I was a little late joining, so I did not get a chance to introduce myself to everybody. My name is Christina Anderson, and I'm the city planner. Thank you all for joining us. We're very excited to have you as new members. So let's see if I can get this to play. How does that look? Can you see the screen? Yes? Great. Okay, so a lot of the work that this board does originates or is guided by some of our planning documents, which all started with Imagine Kalamazoo. Imagine Kalamazoo was our outreach process that we conducted starting in late 2015 through mid-2017, where we engaged the community on a variety of topics, transportation, land use, housing, the environment, across the board, in order to create our master plan document. Now, master plans are something that this board, in addition to the citizen requests, master plans are something that this board does recommend approval on to the city commission. Master plans, are guiding documents that typically focus on land use and transportation, and they have a shelf life of about 10 years. We kicked off a redo of our master plan in 2015 after actually only about 5 years of the last master plan, because it felt that we couldn't wait the full 10 years. It was time for an update. And so we spent a lot of time engaging, had a little over 4,000 points of contact in order to create that plan. And to put that into context, when we did the master plan in 2010, the city did its, a good standard engagement process and had about 400 points of contact. So, Imagine Kalamazoo definitely kind of put us on a different course. We received a lot of different comments through this process, and those comments were used differently by the city and were put into documents and plans that you will use regularly. And I just kind of want to talk about how we put those comments into buckets or sorted the Skittles to figure out how to make sure that we weren't leaving any comments left behind. So we, if we were talking about transportation issues, for example, we heard everything from broad overarching topics like we need to connect our neighborhoods, we need a better pedestrian network, let's do traffic calming in the city. And we took those comments, those broad, 30,000 feet, cover the whole city kind of comments, and put those in our strategic vision document. We got comments that were a little more detailed. So let's talk about, the pedestrian network around schools. Let's talk about sidewalk gaps in neighborhoods. Let's talk about street lighting. Those are the kind of comments that we took and put into our master plan. But through Imagine Kalamazoo and all of the neighborhood meetings that we had and all the other engagement activities, we also got things like fix the sidewalk here, insert location, right? Or there's no lighting here at this bus stop, again, insert location. And very specific comments that don't necessarily have a place in a citywide master plan. And so those were collected and we have been using those in our neighborhood plans, as well as our Parks and Rec plan, our housing plan, whatever it relates to specifically. So that first document I referred to is our strategic vision. And so this is kind of the overarching document that set 10 goals, which are listed there in front of you, for the whole city. Each goal has a little goal map with very specific kind of sub goals under each one. And there are ribbons that run through all of them. So, I showed you initially 4 different strategic vision goals. I pulled out some specific sub goals for each of those that all relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that is something that goes through all of the work that we do. The master plan is probably the most important document that you all will work with. When you review a zoning case, when you review some special use cases, staff will always refer back to the master plan as well as the strategic vision to make sure that what is being reviewed and suggested is in alignment with that. Now, to make sure that, the city is using their plan and not just, did the plan because, cities have to do a master plan, we made sure that the master plan fully aligns with the strategic vision. So what does that mean? It means that each of the goals listed in the master plan is tied back to our strategic vision goals. So everything is in alignment. We also pause each year, it's been 3.5 years, every fall, to look at what we've done in our master plan to make sure that we are using the document and achieving the goals in it. This is a summary from last fall. So about 3 years in, we had just over about a third of the goals and actions in the document completed. And so we check in, we make sure that we're moving things forward. And if we're not, we kind of analyze why and what's missing, who do we need to bring to the table to move something forward. So it's actually a very, active living document. Because we got a lot of very specific comments, and because we knew that we needed to implement the master plan throughout the whole city, as soon as the master plan was approved, we started to work on neighborhood plans. There are 7 neighborhood plans completed, North Side, East Side, Vine, Edison, Oakwood, Winchell, and Parkview Hills. And there are about 5 additional neighborhoods that have started the process. You will see that from the little table that I have in the corner, that just like the master plan, all the goals in the neighborhood plan are tied back in alignment with the strategic vision. Because again, we want all of our plans to be working in the same direction so we can meet that community vision. Neighborhood plans are going to come and will come to this body for for review, for a public hearing, and recommendation for being attached to the master plan as a sub-plan. So this is something that this board will continue to see. And so what do we do with these neighborhood plans? The actions in the neighborhood plans kind of fall into two categories. The first are kind of neighborhood-driven projects, whether they are quick or longer term, ones that are driven by the neighborhood. These are a couple examples in the Vine neighborhood where art was prioritized, so new murals were done, as well as the addition of bike racks. And so each neighborhood has a different set of things that kind of fall into their wheelhouse to move forward with partnership of others, but the neighborhood serves as the leader. There are a lot of tasks in our neighborhoods that are city-driven in order to implement them, and I'm going to talk about two. The first is zoning. So this board reviews zoning changes and new zoning text, whether it comes from city staff or it comes from individuals. So in this case, the Northside Neighborhood Plan had some very specific goals that required a zoning review and update. And so, the neighborhood plan specifically talked about increasing the number of resident-owned businesses, especially those by African Americans and low-income residents, and talked about reviewing the obsolete and intensive commercial and manufacturing zoning that was highly discussed in the neighborhood meetings that we had leading up to the plan. Now that aligns with what the master plan said, which is, we need to update our zoning ordinance to remove barriers for neighbor development. It certainly aligns with the strategic vision work. And so we were able to say, this all aligns. We're meeting the community vision. The neighborhood has a clear path forward. We can create new districts or revise districts, revise the zoning map to make sure that we are meeting the goals in the neighborhood plan. And we do this as well with transportation projects. Every year, this board reviews the CIP, Capital Improvements Plan, which is the plan for the following year of all of the transportation projects that are planned and budgeted. And we use the neighborhood plan and the master plan to help shape that list of projects. And so, the master plan has a goal to prioritize improving the sidewalk network within a quarter mile of schools, parks, and commercial centers. Well, a neighborhood may say, that's great, we have many of those. So we're going to further refine the order of priority to help better budget and better align, whether it's our annual fund dollars or going out for grants like Safe Routes to School dollars. So this is kind of the summary of how the plan alignment goes, right? So the strategic vision is that overarching document with those 10 goals. It's about 30,000 feet above the city is kind of how I describe it. The master plan is about 15,000 feet above the city. It is also a 10-year plan. It focuses a lot on land use and transportation and is going to be the guiding document that this body uses very heavily. Short 5-year plans like the Parks and Rec plan and neighborhood plans, help to implement the goals in the more overarching documents. And we take all of that information when we do our budgets each year, whether it's transportation focused or our general budget. And that's how we're able to kind of move the actions in the plan forward. So I want to go back to zoning because this is something that you guys are going to talk about a lot and see a lot of cases in is the zoning code. The zoning code, is what's zoning. So zoning is a set of rules on how land can be used and developed. It talks about what uses are allowed and if there are any restrictions associated with those uses. It talks about how you locate a building on a lot, including where the driveway might be or parking might be needed to be located. And it can also include things about building form, such as height, location of entrance, certain amount of windows or transparency is what we call it, which is a ratio of windows to wall on parts of the building that face the street. And all of those can be included in the zoning code. Now, zoning is a power that's given to Kalamazoo by the state, and it is intended to support the city's vision. It's intended to support what's in the strategic vision, the master plan, and neighborhood plans. Now, zoning does a lot of stuff, but it's also kind of used as sometimes in conversation or in goals as the thing that can solve all of our problems. And that's not what zoning is. And so I think it's really important to kind of pause here. Zoning is a base layer for any future project that happens, right? We want it to be right. We wanted to be in alignment with the vision for that area. And then we kind of wanted to kind of scoot out of the way, right? Because there are a lot of other issues that a property owner needs to manage when doing a project. You know, property ownership, getting financing, getting plans for development, getting construction, finding construction materials, having construction workers, and just the ongoing support for a business or residents once the project is even built. So again, zoning is that base layer, and it's our goal to have it right. And then to not be a bump in the road when projects come forward because they have all these other pieces. So the last time we updated our zoning code was in 2005. And we've since then updated our master plan. And so it's really time for a city-led update because again, those documents should be talking to each other and be in alignment. We have chosen over the last couple of years, rather than do a wholesale change the whole zoning code out at once, to do incremental changes. And we've done that with a focus on neighborhoods with plans that call out land use issues, neighborhoods that have key commercial corridors or commercial nodes. There are key streets in an area. Well, those have been prioritized for zoning updates, and areas with known barriers. And so I talked a little bit earlier about the work in the north side. You know, one of the things that we found is that we had obsolete zoning that didn't match with what was there and didn't match with where the community was going. And so that poses a barrier to being able to rehab a building or redevelop. So other barriers include rules that maybe mismatch with the size of our blocks and lots. We have lots in the city that are mapped with more than one district, which makes applying standards tricky. And sometimes we just found that the standards don't always work in a way that they were envisioned to. And so these are areas that have been prioritized for our incremental change. And so where does that leave us right now? So right now we are operating with two documents that together make up our zoning code. Appendix A is the code from 2005. What we've done is, as we have, we've reviewed what's in there, and as we review it and make changes and engage with the community, it gets shifted into Chapter 50, which is our new code. Both of these documents reside in our municipal code, so they're next to each other. Right now in Appendix A are most of our zoning districts, landscaping, lighting, signage, and the administration. In our new code, we have our new form-based districts, Live Work 1, Live Work 2, Node, and the downtown districts. Our natural features protection overlay, which has been done the last couple of years, resides in Chapter 50. We've updated parking standards for the city, home occupation standards, and our adult use and medical marijuana standards all exist within Chapter 50. And we are in the process, I kind of grade them out there, of working on updating our sign code to put in Chapter 50, as well as updating all the commercial districts. And so as we take things out of Appendix A gets smaller, Chapter 50 gets bigger, and ultimately that will be our the code that we use full-time. So there's one other thing I want to talk about, and it will be brief. And again, it's important because it does come before you, is historic districts. So Kalamazoo has a series, or has numerous both local designated districts as well as national districts. When a local district is created, the plan for creating that district comes before this board for review and discussion. And so let's talk about what some of the differences between local and national districts are. Local districts are tied to our local set of standards. A national designated district or individual property is not tied to any of our local standards. And so it's designated, but it doesn't require, if anything changes on that property, it doesn't require any review by the local historic district commission. Both local districts and national district buildings can apply for tax credits to help them rehab those properties. And those tax credits are a big deal. And Michigan just reinstated those. And so those are an important asset when rehabilitating a property. Every so many years, the city undertakes a historic district survey. And many of you may have heard about this or seen people out in your neighborhood walking around taking pictures with a tablet or a phone. This is an inventory of all 24,000 structures in the city that's being done by staff and volunteers. It's every building. It doesn't have to be just the stuff that's 50 years or older. It doesn't have to be certain types of uses. It's everything. And so we are going through, and we have done this before, going through to update our survey by, you'll see people walking around in the street, either on the sidewalk or the street, to take pictures, which get geo-referenced, and we get to create a database. This is something that we noted in the master plan that was time for an update, and it gives us a great baseline of data for not only historic districts, but just for our building stock in general. And it does fulfill our obligation from the state as a certified local government, and it fulfills our obligation with state and federal historic preservation offices. So it's a really important project. All of the information that I just talked about is available on the imaginekalamazoo.com website. When you go to that website, there's a tab for plans, and you can review master plan, strategic vision, neighborhood plans, both approved and in progress. There's also a projects tab, which includes any actions that are coming out of Imagine Kalamazoo. And so the historic inventory is on there, the streets projects are on there, a whole variety of other things. And so, I would really encourage you to, if you have not already, to check that out. It's a great way to keep up to date. It's a way that we keep up to date with our residents for projects. It's kind of become the clearinghouse. And, we had when we created the Natural Features Protection Ordinance a couple of years ago, we realized that having one spot for all information, all the questions, all the answers, all the drafts, copies of presentations, to have them all in one place is just the easiest way for anyone who wants to follow a process to follow the process. So it's a really important website, and you'll be hearing about it a lot. But it's also a great place to just, grab your copy, to bookmark it, to grab your copy of plans. So thank you very much. I'm always happy to answer questions about any of the things that I talked about as well. I know that we are short on time today, and that we'll be definitely continuing this conversation to our next meeting, which is great. We can get through everything. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and please don't hesitate to ask questions about the guiding documents that Christina just went over, because like I said, we have no problem wrapping up the training at the next meeting on the 21st.
Does anyone have a quick question right now on that? You must have covered everything so well. Good job.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes, so I'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll just keep an eye on the time.
Yeah, I know we have at least one public comment to play, Pete, so we should allow at least 10 minutes. I don't know how many more have come in since I checked last, so just know.
Okay.
Probably got 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be good to cover part of my section just to dovetail in with what you've just heard about the guiding documents and plans. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint here. All right. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see that? Good. Okay. So, what we've got for planning commissioner role, I just wanted to some of this is really general, but it's nice to step back and go from the start. But this is a body that is basically created by legislation The most recent public act that reaffirmed the use of planning commissions was Public Act 33 of 2008. In general terms, what does the Planning Commission do? Well, Christina, already touched on this, but, make land use decisions which are consistent with the policies and plans formally adopted by the City Commission. Those policies and plans are guiding documents. We're talked about as far as neighborhood plans, transportation plan, the strategic vision, and then, of course, the master plan. And the master plan is significant to the Planning Commission because the Planning Commission helps guide the development of the master plan. So if you're fortunate enough to be serving on the Planning Commission, when we get around to updating the master plan, you'll get an in-depth understanding of how the master planning process works. Planning commissioners usually serve on the steering committee and various breakout committees for putting together the elements of the master plan and the goals. So it's really a wonderful process to be part of, for those that are around when we circle back to that. So as far as how the decision-making occurs, it occurs in three ways, as I've indicated here, with acting as an advisory board to the City Commission on planning and development issues. And those, you'll see there's many situations where you're making a recommendation to approve a rezoning or making a recommendation to approve a text amendment. You're not outright approving it. So that recommendation then goes to the City Commission for ultimate review and approval. Then there is the direct decision making. An example of that are the special use permits. Those are uses that are permitted in certain zone districts, but they're subject to review and approval by the Planning Commission of a special use permit. So if you vote to approve that, then they're off and running with their special use permit and their project. And then there's the responsibility for oversight of the site plan review, which I'm going to get into in more detail later on in the slides here. How does a planning commissioner prepare for this role? Obviously, you'll see I phrase this in the form of questions just to change it up a little bit. Become familiar with the policies and plans of the City of Kalamazoo, which we just talked about. And obviously, Christina mentioned that those are available on the Imagine Kalamazoo website, so you can easily see neighborhood plans, the master plan in full, links to the strategic plan. So attending meetings and trainings, obviously that's very important. We are counting on you to be in attendance at these meetings, to listen, to learn, to help make decisions. And of course, we have to have quorum, otherwise we can't take any action. So we do need you present at the meetings, and we do continue to look for training opportunities throughout the year for our board members. Review agenda packets in advance of the meetings, conduct site visits. Now, site visits it's not required that you drive by and look at properties that are being rezoned, or a particular location that's applied for a special use permit. But if it's something you're not familiar with, we definitely encourage, taking a look so that you can visually see that. I mean, we include maps and images in the agenda packets, but it's not the same as standing there and looking at, all of what's nearby that particular property. And then, of course, asking questions, whether those are asking questions of staff or the applicant who has to be present for these meetings. So, don't, be afraid to ask questions. You might be asking the question that other board members are thinking about, but just haven't gotten there as far as speaking up. So always, ask those questions.
Pete,
yes,
if I may.
Sure. Go right ahead, Clyde.
I would, do not ask questions of the applicant if you make a site visit, because you are getting information that other people are not privy to. And so and if you base your decision on what you learn, that is an, if you will, an extra judicial type of communication that should not take place. That you should make your decision based upon the material and the evidence that's presented to you at the hearing. So if you do a site visit, you should not knock. You should not knock on the door and ask questions of the applicant. So I think that I want to make sure that that's clear, because yeah, you want to ask questions, but ask the questions at the Planning Commission meeting, not when you're out in the field.
Thank you, Clyde. That's a good clarification, because this, site visit can simply be driving up, parking on the side of the street and walking around, that particular area. Yeah, it does not need to, be, going up and knocking on the door and talking to the applicant. It's more looking at the surrounding land use, looking at the subject property, and really getting familiarity with that part of the city, for the discussion that'll take place later. So that's great clarification.
And one more clarification. Again, you don't have the right to go onto private property either to look in the backyard or anything like that.
Correct. Yep, that is true. Okay, so what staff support is provided to the Planning Commission? There's a variety of means of staff support. Obviously, you're here today. You've got the city attorney, and you've got Christina and I from the planning staff. So there is the professional assistance. There is the agenda packets with the staff reports and other background materials that staff has prepared for each application that comes in. So you've gotten the written materials, you've got the expertise to lean on at the city. There are meeting minutes that are maintained, by city staff. So that's not something that the planning commissioners have to manage. And staff will provide updates on current planning issues. As things evolve throughout the year, and projects that are in the works that may be coming to the board in the next month or two. We've got a way of kind of, through the city planner report, putting some information out there to, advise you of what's coming around the corner. And then, of course, trainings, which I already mentioned. So what types of land use decisions does the Planning Commission deal with? So here is, in a nutshell, is the type of requests that you will see come before you. Rezonings, text amendments, special use permits, planned unit developments, preliminary subdivision reviews, right-of-way vacations, and then I've got down at the bottom a review of land use / development related plans, anything from neighborhood plans to master plan amendments. So most of this list, with the exception of special use permits, you're reviewing and making a recommendation to the city commission on these particular items. And then the city commission will take the item up, and an additional public hearing will be held, and then the final decision will be made. So that's, as I mentioned, that's when you're working in your advisory capacity. What information? Okay, it's almost 10 to. What information is provided by applicants? Applicants have a detailed form that they fill out. We now have an application form that is separate from the review sheet, which I'll show you an example of, to try to draw more information out about the application and the project being proposed. And then, of course, there's the summary of the request and the outreach, which is the big part of what we really push for. And I think we just toggle to this real quick. So this is an example of one of the review sheets. And as you can see, these are form fillable. There's space to fill in to describe the text amendment or rezoning proposed. And then it starts halfway down the page with the review criteria. And there's a series of review criteria they then have to go through and answer, and that's what you're looking at below on the screen here is this 1 through 6. The types of questions. And this is very important because this helps formulate those facts surrounding the case or the application, and the facts that Clyde was referring to, that when you speak on, during discussion, you want to touch on those key points. Well, a lot of those key points come from looking at the review criteria and comparing it with the application. So this is a good example of what what you're going to see. And this is the criteria used for rezonings and text amendments. There is also separate criteria that applies for special use permits, as well as right-of-way vacation. So there is, the reason I'm showing this to you is because, there's a lot of information that is gathered to help you make a decision and to help you, figure out how the application aligns with the guiding documents of the city of Kalamazoo. So you should never feel like you're trying to row the boat with one oar. The ordinance is laid out very succinctly with this review criteria, and staff refers to it in every staff report. We are looking at the review criteria, looking at the master plan, like Christina alluded to, and that that will give you a good foothold when starting the discussion about an application. So I think I will stop there given the time. And I don't know if we've gotten any more comments in, but why don't I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Great, thanks, Pete. Let's see so thank you very much to all three of you for your all the information, and we will continue this at our 21st meeting with the additional training material that you guys have. And I appreciate everyone's attention. And I know this isn't the most exciting conversation and topics, but it's very important considering that.
It's very exciting.
Well, hey, it is. It can be, and it is. And certain meetings. Not saying that this wasn't, or you guys did a bad job, but considering that only two of us have more than 2 years experience on this planning commission, this is critical conversation for us, and I think we're going to do this again, and you guys are going to get material like this probably emailed to you. So take advantage of that, review it, ask questions, email questions to staff or us. I'm happy to answer questions, help out as I can to help you get familiar, because some of us got an opportunity to take a slow ride up the on-ramp as we coasted onto the planning commission. You guys don't have that opportunity. You got to get up to speed pretty quick. So we'll do our best to help you out with that. With that, do we have any citizens' comments?
Yes, we have one.
All right. We'll take that now.
Hi, my name is Tina McClinton. I am from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I was calling because I am worried about us flooding again. Didn't do it last year because we were in a drought. I live on Lake Street. I've been trying to save the last green space between Lake and Stockbridge. Oh gosh, I think since December of 2018, and in January 3rd of 2019, they were told that this was not an appropriate place to build an apartment. Now they want to build a 77-car parking lot and destroy the green space that's the last one in Southtown neighborhood. This is our last green space. This is the last natural watershed. It's a last wetlands. I mean, it's a green space. It's beautiful. It has lots and lots of old trees, big trees, and they absorb water. The ground absorbs the water. No one helps us when we flood. When we flood, the storm drains fill up in the streets, back up the sewage. That's what comes up in our homes. Comes up through the drains in our basements, comes up in the streets. And this problem has been going on now since 2017, since KBCC Growing Field came over and built and took away 12 acres of natural green space. We were promised by them that it wouldn't make the flooding any worse, but before they did that, we only flooded once every 10 years. Now we flood 2 to 3 times every year. This little piece of green space has lots of natural wildlife. I have pictures of a falcon. I have hawks, mama and baby. We have deer. We have foxes. We have turtles. We have frogs. We have lots of animals. I have lots of butterflies and honeybees in my yard. It's just our little piece of country in the city. And we've been trying to save this little piece of green space. It's all we have left. We have no more green space. We have nowhere else for the animals to go or for us to enjoy. Just because Lake Street is a poor neighborhood, we still need some kind of green space to enjoy. Yeah, there's a park, but it's not the same. You have all the animals. This green space absorbs water like a sponge, and it helps my home from flooding. I'm afraid if they do put this parking lot, if they put this parking lot on a floodplain, they will drown my home out and everybody else in the neighborhood. Please help save this green space. Thank you. Bye.
And that was the only public comment.
All right. Thank you very much. And I see Mr. Urban has left, so no citizen commission comments. So looks like that's it. So we're at 6 o'clock. It's a beautiful evening. Once again, welcome to the new planning commissioners. Thank you all for your attention. Our next meeting is on April 21st, correct? Yep. Okay. April 21st. So until then, everyone be safe. It's getting a little crazy out there again. So everyone, please be safe. And we'll look forward to seeing you on April 21st. In the meantime, if you have questions, follow up with staff, and we will see you then. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, we are adjourned.